I knew they
Mary,
were going to come dressed up. They always try
yeah.
to pull something
Mary,
out. So,
Mary, I'm not gonna lie. When you texted the group saying we're dealing with technical difficulties, and I'm like, is that Zoom or something with your costumes?
Oh no, it was Zoom. I'm a himbo. I don't really do the internet. So
so
Oh, good thing.
John, they took the effort to dress like Sir Richard Francis Burton and Typhoid Mary. I hope you appreciate the
So,
eccentricity.
so good, and I'm getting. You bet I'm getting photos of this. So like,
Please,
I'm pinning you now. So,
I'll
oh,
have
look
them
at
send
this.
it to me.
Yeah, fantastic,
But thank you so much for joining us. So we are just a
brilliant.
little blog on Instagram called Cult Musicals, and we talk about underrated, forgotten, obscure musical movies. And our goal is to share these really niche cult musicals with the world. And so we tried to interview, celebrities who are from these cult musicals, writers, directors, because we want these cult musicals to maintain their presence and even grow. And Zero Patience is one of those musicals that I've been trying to push for years. And I remember, and we'll get into everything. I remember I emailed you probably 2017 when I first started this as a project. And I said, oh, blah, 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 cult musicals. And your response is like, cool, I love cults. I remember that years ago. So
Still
we're just
true.
so,
Still true. Bring them
I'm
on.
just so honored that you took the time to talk with us about Zero Patience. We all have different opinions about Zero Patience, but it's one of those musicals that needs to be seen. But before I ramble on, I'll let my co hosts introduce themselves and tell John your reactions to Zero Patience.
I'm
Who's going?
Mary Poppins. And this was quite the show, James. I mean, I wasn't expecting singing buttholes, but that's what we got. And I'm not mad about it. I was just a little shocked. But
We
it
had
it was a great
it's worth sharing that we actually had to shoot that scene twice because the first time we filmed it, my camera person, my director of photography, who's super sweet guy, he's going, it was too much. There's something about the teeth in the butthole that
I mean,
make
I
it a
didn't
bit
say anything.
much.
You're so
So,
right.
but so we remade them, and we said up the Bert and Ernie Muppet quality and make them a bit more cuddly. So now the contrast is bigger between the teeth and the cuddly butts, the cuddly buttocks.
Totally asshole
But
puppetry was
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, it was. Where do you get advice about singing assholes? It's like there was
It
nowhere to
wasn't
go. We had to find out ourselves.
Where do you get advice about singing assholes? Ask Barbara Streisand.
Lightning, Lori Lind, someone who should be on your list. Lori Lind, who made a bunch of extraordinary musicals, is Barbara's biggest fan and will come and stalk you for saying that. He'll strike you with lightning.
Okay. Uh-oh. In Hades.
I'm Hades nuts. I initially was like, okay, so it's kind of like wild, like what's this time traveling sort of like fella? Like, why is he there? Like, what is his purpose? Like, he's a little goofy. And then I realized that it was more of a narrative about, like that sort of outdated opinion rather than the man himself. So I loved that. And then once I figured that out, because there was a lot of campiness and I was expecting like John Waters-esque sort of stuff going on, initially. I don't know why. I think it was because you told me there was butthole puppetry. And so I was like ready for John Waters goofiness and not like an actual like beautiful story to be told. Like that's a very important story to be told. And thank you for telling it in a way that is easily to capture your attention as well as, like it's not all doom and gloom. There's a little bit of comedy happening here, but it's definitely a heavy story. And like it was fantastically told. I loved that. And I was well informed of, a lot more than I was before watching it. So thank you
Oh,
very
well,
much for that.
appreciate those words and thoughts. Really, really meaningful. It definitely was a film which came out of all the AIDS activism of that late 80s, early 90s moment. I was involved in ACT UP, working with ACT UP in New York and LA, and also very much in my hometown, Toronto, working with AIDS Action Now, which was our AIDS activist group. And the thing that was driving me nuts was the only thing you could see on the screens at that point was four hanky melodramas. You know, people, Philadelphia, in fact, Philadelphia came out the same year as ours, but it can sort of stand as the example of earnest melodrama of it was always white guys wasting away, lying on their beds, suffering lots of tears. And it's like, that's not who I see in my life. That's not who I'm, on the care teams, working with, living with. You know, everyone's people were absolutely dying, but we weren't dying just on the beds weeping. We were out in the streets fighting back. And I wanted to capture the humor as a survival tactic, song as a survival tactic. Michael Callan, who plays Miss HIV,
Mhm.
he played that role with half a lung. He was, like he'd had another bout of pneumocystis, and he was really like, we were all, is he even going to make it to set? And we were saying, we can reschedule if you're not feeling up to it. And he said, we're shooting this because I may never, and he lasted another 6 months. But singing that beautiful line where he held the note, he had three conditions. It all leads back to Barbara. So he said he wanted the wig from On a Clear Day, he wanted the dress from Funny Lady, and he wanted to hold a note longer than Barbara had ever done on screen. And he got all three, and he did it with half a lung. So it's a pretty extraordinary man. And to me, that sort of epitomizes the spirit of what we were trying to do with the film, and trying to capture that moment of activism and energy and excitement, as much as the anger and the fight back, and trying to be true to all of that.
It is, and I'll get to my opinion, but Doc, so there's
Right,
two Johns, I'll call you Doc.
all right. John, Doc John is my common username, but when this was pitched, I almost didn't think about watching it, but like others, I was told about the singing buttholes. So I was like, okay, this is some South Park-esque shit, so I gotta see this. And I, like
Blame
others have said,
Canada.
it was incredibly, it's almost like it deals with the seriousness of the topic, but it has like that fantastical element. It kind of reminded me of the movie Time After Time with
Okay.
Malcolm McDowell. It's about a time traveling H.G. Wells who goes to modern day California. Not a musical, sadly, but it has a little bit of that. But also, it's like I was trying to think of like the second thing I was trying to think of, but it's like it is. It's and again like it's so outlandish, and it's every second you can't turn away from it. Like there's always something there to catch your attention. It's like I would be very disappointed if I found this boring. So, and thankfully I was not. It was like every song was catchy, and for as campy and as funny and charming as well, there were so many great quiet moments too. Like one of my favorite moments was I need to double check his name because I don't want to butcher it. Um, it was when the former lover was looking at the slideshows and he came across Zero's picture and he's reminiscing, and all that emotion of sadness and regret is sneaking up on him. And that was such a beautifully sad moment too, like with a lot of like I'm sure emotions that a lot of people felt during that time. And it's a film that I do want to recommend to people, but I have to give a massive ask, like a massive like here's a warning. This is definitely an adult film because there's stuff in here that obvious, yeah.
And that's how I sell it to people. I sell the humor, but I want to downplay the seriousness until they get into it. and
Mhm.
then they come around away from it being like, shit, this is actually really deep. And my introduction to Zero Patience was when I was 19. That's when I came out. And there was a bookshop in Atlanta that was like the mecca for the LGBT community called Outright. And it had books and it had, remember Outright? It had books, it had DVDs, it was a coffee shop, and it was CDs. And I remember going there so often when I was 19 because I would go to like, that's how I found out about movies. That's how I found out about books and things of that nature. And they had a musical section, and I discovered Zero Patience and another musical called 20 Centimeters. And I fell in love with both of them. And I mean, 2009 USA is completely different than 2024 USA. And it's Zero Patience. Of course, I bought it because it was a musical. I bought it because there was a gorgeous man on the cover, of course. But then when I got into it, I was like, this is such a deep movie. And we're all of the particular age, all of my co-hosts. Some of us are a little bit older, but I feel like we grew up in a generation that came after the
Yeah.
AIDS crisis. And so for us growing up, it was like almost this mystical, folkloric time where you heard about it, but you didn't really hear about it in 1990s in the USA. You didn't, it was something that was like days past. And even though that it wasn't that long ago in terms of when we were growing up, it was like almost like this folkloric past. And then of course, as you and in 2009, when I first saw this, I was like, oh, they have all these medications now, and oh, AIDS is not really talked about this much anymore, HIV. But what I realized, and what a lot of us come away watching Zero Patients is that probably more than ever, not just because of the AIDS activism. Zero Patients is more relevant now than I think it's ever been. I mean, it was very, very, very relevant in 1994 because people who were struggling with HIV and AIDS were still alive and dealing with, and for better or worse, new administrations had come in, but had they done that much for HIV?
Well,
So, and for the
yeah.
LGBT community. So I think Zero Patience, I always try to sell it with humor and sell it as like it's filled with 90s gay club music, but people come away from it, especially the ones I've recommended, and say, wow, it's actually a very deep movie. And I just want to applaud you for making a musical that's ridiculous and wonderful and campy, but makes people think. Because a lot of us grew up in a generation where it either wasn't talked about or we grew up after the greats had fought for what they had fought for.
No, this 92 when we shot the film. And so I was writing in 91, 92, and then we shoot in 92. And that was a moment when there was no cure in sight. There was people were it was the pinnacle of people dying, of so many funerals every week. And even within our cast and crew, we had to recast sometimes because people would be too sick to play a role. And so we were trying to navigate our lives, make a film, make an indie feature film on a tiny little budget, relatively. It was, but for a musical and the ambition of what we were trying to do, a museum comes to life, etc. It's like, oh boy, but trying to trying to navigate the real life stuff of, I was on a few care teams in that period right through those years. And so I'd do my shifts on a Friday or a Saturday and then be back in pre-production. And so it was very much life coming into the script, and pretty well every scene, even though it's fantastical, even though it's got, sort of crazy Mary Poppins moments, etc., it's got every scene is anchored in real things that actually I witnessed or was part of, or friends had told me about. And so it was growing out of lived experience. And it was more than anything trying to capture the courage of everyone who was sick and dying of that in that moment, the courage of people fighting back together, the courage of a community, fags and dykes and friends and allies coming together when there was so much hatred coming from the American right wing in particular, famously Reagan not even saying the A word for the first 7 or 8 years of the epidemic, etc. And legislation which was trying to quarantine and lock people up, and trying to come out of this epidemic of blame and to speak about a community actually fighting back and finding itself. We found each other in the process of all that grief.
And it's so important because I was completely, like I said, for better or worse, when I first saw the film in 2009, a lot of HIV and AIDS have no longer been in the USA
Yeah.
media. Maybe because there have been progresses in medicine, but maybe the world had changed for better or worse. But
Definitely.
you were my first introduction to Patient Zero. And the fact that you based this particular, I mean, it's a fantastical story, which I'll get into, but you based this entire premise on basically a victim of someone, and you can tell my co-host, someone who was just randomly blamed for bringing AIDS to the USA and Canada, just randomly selected. And I think you
And
gave him a voice when I don't think anybody else in the world, no media, no musical, no movie, no book or anything, gave him a voice.
there since there's been a wonderful documentary done by Lori Lind, who is the biggest Barbra Streisand fan, but also did a really good, powerful documentary called Finding Patient Zero. There's been, I think that's the main. There's of course, and the band played on, which is the antithesis of what I was doing. And the band played on has some elements that are interesting to look at, but its depiction of Patient Zero is just it's so deeply offensive, but equally it's so deeply bizarre. They like in terms of portraying a French Canadian or Quebecois Air Canada flight attendant, they cast this guy and they make him speak with this sort of funny Russian accent, as though we're back in the Cold War, and we're going through some sort of Russian US spy story about a double agent who's infiltrating, the America. So this bizarre depiction, and the band played on a mini series which has been pretty much forgotten. I don't know if you guys have seen it.
I've heard of the book.
It was the book itself was the sort of whole reason I made the film, because of my fury. On the one hand, real respect for Randy Schultz for telling this extraordinary detailed the first 5 years of the pandemic and documenting American government's indifference and bigotry, but using that saleable hook of the Patient Zero vampire story as a way to sell this book. They're like, ethically, that just violates everything we should be standing for as a community. And shame on Randy, even though, credit where credit's due, he was a historian who brought some knowledge, some really invaluable knowledge to light. So,
And I love how you call him just Patient Zero or Zero in the film.
yeah,
I love
yeah,
that because it allows him to be a separate character that could have been anybody. It didn't have to
yeah,
be that
yeah,
particular person,
yeah,
which I think was a very smooth and very great choice of yours, just to call him Zero.
yeah, yeah. No, he was like, ironically, the gay world in particular of that time was so small. So I knew people who'd slept with him. I knew people who, and they said, "Oh yeah, Gaetan is a sweetheart." I saw him at the baths the other night, like, like back, like reminiscing. But when I saw him at the baths, he was like full of life. He was like having a hard time, but you know, like he was known in the community because he was a flight attendant jumping from city to city. He liked to go out and party, but his cooperation with the scientists was crucial to actually us understanding that AIDS was sexually transmitted. And so, as my film, as Laurie's documentary point out, he should be acclaimed as a hero. He was, someone who was helping us understand what AIDS is and helping us fight back and helping us cure it, instead of being demonized as a vampire, as a Russian speaking vampire.
I think your premise is probably, and I love cult musicals. I got a Rolodex in my head. Zero Patience's premise is probably the most original idea of a musical I've ever heard. I mean, it's beautiful, and I love how you didn't just make a cult musical or a musical about patient zero, but instead you have the limbo ghost aspect. You have Sir Francis Richard Burton, who was a complete nut job back in his day, to come back or stay alive. I just think, where did those fantastical elements come from?
A lot of it came from inspired by the work of a wonderful filmmaker called Stuart Marshall from England. And he sadly never made a musical, but he was an amazing experimental filmmaker who died of AIDS in about 1990. A dear friend, an incredible influence. And he's credited with making probably the first AIDS film, bar none. The very first one, an experimental work called Kaposi sarcoma, talking about the lesions which defined many of the first diagnoses. And so Stewart's work, his most famous work is called Bright Eyes, and it's worth a Google. And it's a feature-length film made for Channel 4 in England, 1984. So again, super early. But he was the first one to theorize AIDS on screen as something within history. So a history of epidemics, a history of diseases, looking at history for clues as to what we're going through today, of this sort of pattern of stigmatization, of blame, this collective obsession about blood and bodily fluids, the tropes of paranoia that had us all in their grips through the early 80s. And so Stewart's work, by placing AIDS within a continuum of history of diseases, gave us, I think, invaluable lessons about how we could fight back, how we could get away from the stigmatization, the finger pointing, and start to identify society has these habits and patterns. But if society is confronted with them and called on them, maybe they'll snap out of it and start to do the right thing. And so that inspiration of Stewart was really what made me want to dig into history and say, who could I dig up from history who could epitomize empire and constructing a disease through a lens of racism, through through a lens of homophobia. And it's like, Sir Richard Francis Burton, hello, there you are. And putting him to work was the job description. So, and then
It's
dreaming up this
brilliant.
crazy love story. So, yeah.
It's so cathartic and dreamy. It's a very dreamy movie. And I just love it. I'm gonna let my co-host talk, but I just love it. And I think it's beautiful. And I will say this, and I'll remind you at the end of this. I have always, since I've seen this film in 2009, I think this would be a wonderful stage musical. I would love to see
Oh
Zero
yeah.
Patience as a stage musical.
That someone this back in, I feel like the early 2000s, someone, I can't remember where, someone did it. They adapted it. And they never like they sent me a really bad VHS of a single shot. It was the most touching thing. I burst into tears. I was so moved and touched by it. It was just extraordinary. I've lost touch with them and I don't remember. I can't retrieve. But it was someone pushed it up the mountain and put it on stage.
I always have said though, like if you listen to the songs now and the lyrics and the music, it could easily be adapted today. And I think it would work and I think it would shine. And I think you touched on something, but I'm gonna let my co-host talk. It seems that every generation has paranoia, and there's always a patient zero. The way that you're talking about AIDS and the paranoia and quarantining and trying to find who caused it in the end, it kind of sounds a little bit like the what we've lived through in terms of stuff. So it's not refreshing, but it's I guess a little bit comforting but terrifying to know that every generation has, not to the extent that AIDS was, because that was a completely different beast, but that there's always a sense of finger pointing and trying to figure out who caused it, who's the root problem of this, and and spending so much time and energy and money trying to figure out who caused something. We could have been using that time and energy and money to actually curing and making solutions versus trying to find a scapegoat. And
And
that's why
why
I think zero patients can work very well today.
and why is the American right wing always, or not the American, why are right wings in general around the world always so good at asking the wrong questions? So instead of asking, how did this guy help us understand scientifically that AIDS was sexually transmitted and giving him his due, why instead are we so obsessed with turning him into a scapegoat? So,
But you
echoing you.
turned him into a ghost and then turned him into a really fleshed out character. But we'll get to the music in a second. But my co-host, do you have any questions before we move on or any comments about anything John said?
Something that I just realized, the other thing I was going to compare it to that popped in my head. Are you familiar with the works of Derek Jarman?
It's a lot of Derek ended up in that film,
I
and also my other film, Lilies, in particular. So, yeah.
Okay. I felt like this cannot be a mistake because I see a lot of like Sebastian, maybe a little
Oh,
bit of Jubilee, and it
love it.
also reminded me of probably his most abstract movie, Blue, that came
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
Yeah, so
His great, his great, great film about AIDS and his own
mhm.
personal experience. I was when Zero Patience was no, it was my previous film called Urinal. When Urinal played the Berlinale in 1989, and it was my first big film. It was my first feature, my first big festival, and the festival was very queer friendly, and so they put us in this notorious. There was a bed and breakfast above the Berlin's most notorious leather bar called Tom's Bar, and so we were staying upstairs from Tom's Bar, and who was I having breakfast with every morning but Derek Jarman? And I believe he just made, because he wanted to stay at Tom's Bar too. Who wouldn't? And he had just made Jubilee, and Jubilee was being debuted. I'm pretty sure it was Jubilee, but the heartbreak of that moment was a dear friend of his was dying of AIDS, and Derek had brought this friend to Berlin as a sort of like, let's have a treat, let's bring you to a festival. And then the friend got really sick, and so he basically just stayed in the bed and breakfast for the duration, and Derek ended up missing most of the festival because he was just taking care of this dear friend. And so it's a very it's a memorable moment of meeting my idol, who was such a hero for so many of us, and the work that followed, Edward II and Blue in particular. These are such an extraordinary films.
John is our resident like movie aficionado, so he's our resident movie historian, so
Well,
he
you,
can
you
tell
got
you.
it. You got it in one.
There you go. Hades and Mary, do you have any questions or comments before we move on? I can't get over y'all's drag. I love it. I
I
hate it.
I
Mary,
don't,
I
not
go
just
ahead.
the sideburns, but those eyebrows. Awesome. So good.
Thank you. Everyone
The
always
only thing
comments
I'm
on
regretting
that.
is now I'm wishing my Burton had a nice little red do as well.
Okay.
It's a good
Yeah.
look. It's a very good look.
I'm
Thank
waiting for Hades to bust out in song, but I'm also waiting for Mary to be like, attention all in-flight patient, you know.
Yes.
I love it. Go ahead, guys.
Oh,
Oh, if you have anything.
heartbreaking that our typhoid Mary is no longer with us. She passed about 15 years ago of cancer. Yeah.
Aw.
But I mean, I think you can tell a sweetheart, and just someone who was just deeply like loved the project, loved it with all her heart.
She looked so passionate with everything she was in, like in the movie
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Very
Honestly,
passionate,
all
very
the
touching.
all the acting in it, and was top notch. Honestly,
Thanks.
Agreed.
we've seen some cult musicals, questionable acting, all right, but not in this one. Not in this
Yeah,
one. That's good.
all of the actors were on point. Like you could tell that even though it was such a difficult story to tell. Everyone had a great time, like performing. Like it looked like everyone enjoyed themselves, despite the heavy topic.
I have a
we oh, go for it. Yeah.
So the scene where he's in the suit with the plastic wrap, I was so concerned for his well-being. Did there be to that? Or was it just like, oh, let's just see when he passes out, or
It was that we had to, it was a lot of offset wrangling. Not because he was, it kept failing. So it kept deflating. So to be like, oh, come on, and we get a take, and then it's like, no, it deflated again. So
I was,
yeah.
yeah, I could see that. I was very concerned that any moment it was, this guy's gonna pass out. What are they doing to this guy?
She was
You
so
know?
concerned, like while we were watching it, she's like, he's got to get out of that.
So good.
You know,
So good.
John, we are gonna maybe shadow cast this one day. And
I wanna.
Hades is gonna play Richard Burton and Mary's gonna play Typhoid Mary with her whole take your medicines east and west. I love it. We'll try to fake Canadian accents. I don't know how well we'll do
No,
it.
he was French Canadian.
We have a group chat, and while we're watching it, I just text James, our like how what we're, our tea. I call it tea with James, and so I'm texting James our tea while James is off there in England sleeping, naturally. So James gets to wake up to this glory. So I'm like, what accent is this? How can I get laid if nobody can see me? And I'm like, what accent is this? And it's like, he was French Canadian.
Very good.
Some other, what else? Oh, I love the song When You Pop a Boner in the Shower. That was my spouse's favorite one too. The choreography, like the shower choreography.
The boys had fun.
Top-notch. I'm highly inspired with drag now. Like it's top notch. Okay.
And we'll get into the music. I mean, it would have been a wonderful movie without a musical, but since musicals are niches, what made you to be inspired to turn this really campy but really serious and timely story into a musical?
It had a lot to do with where we began talking about the only thing that was on screen, the only thing that was available were the serious dramas, the four hanky dramas, very apolitical. They were all about like showing victims, let's put victims on screen as spectacle. And so we wanted to fight that in every way. And what better way to fight the melodrama than to do the antithesis, which is the campy musical. And this was a funny moment in terms of musical history. Like we're back, the pendulum swung back where musicals are being made, good ones are being made, strong ones are being made. But 93, believe me, was a wasteland. There was very little. Musicals had become so discredited. And so it was this sort of, it was a bit of being like almost bad boys going, me and Glenn, the composer, going, we're going to just rub it in their noses. Like everyone hates musicals right now. We're going to do a musical about this most serious topic in all our lives and use that as a fight back strategy. Like that to me epitomizes a sort of queer camp fight back strategy of take the thing that's most despised and throw it back at the world and use that as something subversive, because again, ACT UP was all about trying to change the message. And so instead of saying, we're weak and we're victims and we're dying, cry, it's like, we're furious, we're angry, we're in the streets, we're fighting back, but we're doing it with humor and we're doing it with music. And that was because as a community, we come together and we don't just cry and we don't just yell. We've got, everything that makes us rich and complicated is our humor and our music, as well as everything, as well as our grief and our losses and everything we've lost. So
you said something really important, and we've said it before. Most of our favorite cult musicals come from the late 70s, 80s, and early 90s, where it wasn't cool to make a musical anymore.
Yeah.
Most of all those musicals failed, and they've become cult classics because people were just musicals were seen as this golden age thing. And so I love how you made a musical as a protest, not only to people that, ignoring HIV in the gay community, but you also made a musical because you wanted to annoy people and throw this message in their face. And I think that was really great. I mean,
What
we
are,
love musicals because of this reason.
there, you guys are the experts. Remind me, what were the other musicals of that era, like early 90s?
Dick Tracy, you
I
had
was
Dick
thinking
Tracy,
Easy.
I was
huh?
thinking Beauty and the Beast,
Well,
Beauty.
like
yeah,
Disney Renaissance film.
but in terms
But
of
those were
that,
kind of they were very safe. Like we need to make this for families, and we're not when like the biggest message is true love and whatnot and fairy
And
tale stuff.
and
So
Disney animation had a through line right through. Like Beauty and the Beast
yeah,
was one of the big films. Like it was a genuine success. But it would be, I think, first talked about as animation and
right.
secondly as a
So
musical. Yeah.
exactly, and so like Disney was able to get away with that kind of
Yeah.
animated stuff. But in terms of like big budget musicals, I mean, most of the ones we love, like Dick Tracy, didn't do that well. It was
I you,
91.
you know what's hilarious? I had no idea it was a musical. I've never seen it. Madonna's
there's
in it, right?
yes,
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
Mandy
we
Patinkin.
want Harpo and
And Mandy, oh my God.
yes, and of course, it's Warren Beatty, of course.
Yeah. And
And
does he
so
sing?
he's the only
No,
character that doesn't sing.
Got
But
it.
it is we're not gonna harp too much on it, but it's very beautiful and it's very campy and it's gorgeous and it deserves its just dues. But yes, it's a full-fledged musical.
Too
But
much.
but the 80s, of course, when you think of all the 80s musicals that we love, all of them failed because it wasn't seen as this. And so I love
Yeah.
how in 1993 you're like, this is a dying art form. People hate musicals, and that's why I'm going to do it. I love
Yeah.
how you did a musical out of a protest.
So punk
And the
rock.
music
yeah, I was gonna say
and
like this is you taking every trope that like mainstream America basically either just didn't like or were like, and that's old school, and you're just like, screw you.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is the gayest musical you'll ever see in your life. Deal with it.
and I love the music in this movie. The music has stuck with me since I saw it. And I'll talk about my favorite scene in my favorite musical. But guys, what is your favorite song? And you can tell John and why. And then we'll ask John what your favorite song is and why.
You guys go first.
Yes, of course.
The Papa Boner in the Shower song is just so funny and campy. The choreography, like, it's unlike anything, like, I love that choreo. Like, I want that. I want like a full scale, like, drag king number,
Nice.
coordinate that shit.
Nice.
I love that song so much. It's so funny.
You already know mine, the butthole song.
Awesome.
As shocking as it was for my delicate sensibilities, whatever, James.
Yeah.
It was very
Honest,
lovely.
it is kind of hard to choose between those two. Like, I mean, every song in this slaps in their own way, but like, I appreciate, especially like not just for the campiness and absurdity of those other two songs, but just like the choreography, as Hades mentioned for the shower song. Like every second, I kept expecting, like, when are they gonna flash us? When are they gonna flash us? It's like, come on! It's like, okay, we're not gonna get that, but that was really catchy and impressive. But then the butthole song, I did not know what to expect when I first heard the a song that was a butthole duet. But honestly, just hearing those lyrics of like it's two assholes talking to each other, it's like, okay, you took this, and I think I have to give it to that simply for the fact that I now know of a song that features two characters talking, literally talking out of their ass.
Ah, my favorite song that has stuck with me, and I found the soundtrack on eBay not too many years after I got saw Zero Patience. Just like Scheherazade has stuck with me so much since I
Oh,
first saw it. I love it's such a beautiful and haunting scene and number, but the lyrics are so gorgeous. And it's just, I mean, the way that you start the movie to see Zero suspended in limbo, and he's by himself and he doesn't have anybody, and he's healthy and he's young again, and that doesn't make him happy because he's alone in purgatory. And Scheherazade, of course, was a character who told the stories for, what is it, a thousand Arabian Nights, or etc.
Thousand
Yeah.
and One Nights.
Which Sir Francis Burton, I did some research on, he translated for. And so I love that connection between the character Sir Francis Burton and that. But it's such a beautiful song. And it's like, I don't know, it's very sad and it's very haunting, but it's like you hear about this character, then you see him and he doesn't want to be alone, and he's stuck in purgatory. And that song has stuck with me all throughout my life, ever since I've seen
Ah,
Zero Patience. And I think that's the way it is. And you see it's like neon green and smoke behind, and he's in purgatory. And I think and I'm not going to ramble on too much, but his purgatory, I would like to think that our idea of heaven or our idea of purgatory is where we're happy. And I like to think that he's at the baths. He's
yeah,
in the baths, and that's where he's at. That's where he was the
yeah,
happiest. And so that's where his purgatory is. And I
yeah.
think it's so gorgeous.
Oh, thanks.
It's
Well,
so haunting.
it's my favorite is it is the Butthole Duet because of that idea of like us talking as assholes about the thing that's become most demonized, which is ass fucking. And so actually being able to say it and talk about it and talk about the fears that gay men were living with, because as activists we like show ourselves as strong and we're, fighting in the streets, but then we have to come home and we're in bed together, and those fears of infection and doubt and how do you navigate that with your most vulnerable and most personal sexuality. So that one for me, it still is the one I'm most excited by, in terms of like what a music number can do for people in terms of bringing conversation to life. Because if you stage that conversation between two gay men naturalistically, it'd be flat. It'd be like a bit didactic, a bit flat, a bit on the nose. But the minute you move it 2 feet south or 3 feet south, then it starts to lift off again.
I love
So
that lyric. He goes, "Are you awake? I never sleep."
yeah. And then with Scheherazade, my favorite version of Scheherazade is in the credits, because that's Michael Callan singing, and he does a killer version. And when I hear it, I'm just transported back to missing Michael, and what a wonderful, wonderful friend he was. So yeah. So
An honorable mention to Control. I really like
love it.
Control.
Love it.
I
Yeah.
I wanted to
Yeah.
mention that I forgot about that because it kind of ties into something else I noticed involving Sir Richard. Was It's not only talking about like the seriousness of it or how they're dealing with it, but it's also pushing it back against like sensationalizing it, like
Yeah.
this crisis, because he's coming at this from like oh wow, I can make an exhibit, I can put this in an exhibit I'm creating. Here, let me just be up blunt and talk to you about this disease that you and your friends have, as if it's like, oh, are you feeling okay? Do you have a common cold? It's like, no, like you're calling out that kind of exploitive, uh, trying to think of the correct term, exploitive, uh, showmanship of it, I guess.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Is
Exactly.
that
Like,
yeah.
I even in that moment, we were 10 years into that pandemic, and we could see we'd had a decade of news media exploiting sensationalism. And so that came directly out of the specific story of Randy Schultz exploiting the patient zero story, but more the mass media, exploiting headlines at the expense of, sanity and common sense. And
I
we've
want to
seen we've
ask
seen
you a question.
chapters of that with COVID too. So
I didn't mean
Go
to
on.
interrupt you. I'm sorry. I've always wanted to ask you this, and I'm so happy I'm talking to you. The ending is really, really sad, and I love how you end the film. Is there any particular reason? I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I can't get into your brain. You're the writer of this. But is there any particular reason that Zero wants to be let go? That he wants to just go back to the Nexus and the other world? Why do you think that Zero, he's accomplished what he wanted to do, which is to say, I'm not the first, but I'm the best, he says. I'm not the first. And so he gives a voice to others. Is there any reason particular that you chose to have Zero want to go, I guess, home?
It seemed to me super important to emphasize that ghosts aren't here with us. They're not living a full life. They're not living the full life they had. They've lost something and it's called their life. And so for him to be in this world living a half life, I didn't believe that he'd want to stay because no one can see him, you know? It's no one can have sex with him. So what does life offer? What does life in our world offer him? So maybe him going back to he's making his peace with his death. But the important thing was we're talking about AIDS and you know, death wasn't a happy ending. There's no even a musical can't make that a happy ending. And so it was important to hold on to that as part of the story we were all in the middle of living back then.
And maybe, if Richard slowly stops, finally like ages, maybe he and Zero will be together again. Maybe that's the sappy romantic in me that thinks they could.
Exactly. They could be ghosts together. Is like Zero could turn around and say, "Hey, buddy, I'm not going to stay here, but you could come with me." So why not?
We only have a couple more questions, but the first one is, so at what point did you decide or did you realize that this particular cult musical or musical had been rediscovered again by people who had seen it for the first time and consider it to be this campy, kitschy thing?
We did a 4K restoration 2 years ago, and so it's been on the circuit, gay film festivals picking it up, playing it. We did a screening here at a local review theater called the Paradise. And so watching it with audiences who weren't even born when we made it, it has been a joy. And it's been like rediscovering and having conversations, like learning what it means to people today, which is very different than the film I thought we'd made. And that's an incredible gift. It's an incredible um, it, there's I think a truth about every work of art. Like you have to let go of it. You have to just like Zero has to let go. We have to let go and let it live in its own way, sending it out in the world and rediscovering Zero 30 years later myself, seeing it through these new eyes in these new ways. It's been pretty rich. It's been some surprises and it's been very satisfying. So yeah.
Well, we love it. And we're going to try our hardest to keep spreading the message that, I mean, it needs to be seen. It's wonderful. I lure people in with, the premise of it's campy, it's kitschy, it's erotic, it's hilarious, but it hits people with a message afterwards where you're like, you feel very somber and you also get, I guess, a fire in your belly to like continue on fighting against censorship and fighting against pointing fingers and paranoia. And I think it's a very multifaceted, multi-layered musical. And I think it's great. Um, so what would you hope the legacy of Zero Patients would be if you had to direct all of your energy to 2024? It's 30 years later. What do you hope the legacy of this musical would be? Because we love it, by the way. But
It's I think exactly this sort of conversation where people are discovering it on their own terms in their own lives, finding a connection between the story we told then and the stories we're telling each other today to, at the 1001 stories we're telling each other today and tonight. And thinking thinking about continuity, particularly thinking about continuities of activism. I've been very involved, like so many, in the protests around Gaza, and working with queer Palestinians, and I'm part of a group called Queer Cinema for Palestine. And so doing that sort of solidarity work and that sort of activism work, it seems it connects very directly with some of the activism we did 30 years ago with AIDS, fighting back around AIDS, and our community coming together in the cause of good, in the cause of making the world better. Seems to me the continuity. And if people, if it helps become part of a lived memory of what we went through, what an entire generation went through, losing so many beautiful, beautiful artists and friends and lovers, and if it becomes part of how we remember, that's a delight. That's as much as any one of us could hope for.
Do you guys have any other questions? I know Mary loves to ask our guest about bloopers. So Mary, I'm gonna let you ask about that. That's your niche. That's your thing.
Yeah, is there any like silly things that happened on set or like that happened and you kept in the movie because it was funny?
There's the silliest thing, it was really funny. This was back in the day where people continuity used Polaroids for recording continuity, costume continuity, set deck continuity. Polaroids, sort of expensive. And we like, me and the crew and the cast would do what are called googlies. And it's where you lean forward and so your face is sort of hanging. And I don't know if let me try and do one right now. Hold on. So you go like this, you go and you sort of like let your face relax, and then you go and if you do it as a Polaroid, you get this blurriness of snapping the googly and getting a good like distorted face as a still frame. And the poor Anna and Robin and Louise, the producers, were getting so pissed off because they keep getting these Polaroid bills and be like, what the fuck is continuities doing this? Like, so that's my googly story.
Do y'all have any other questions or comments before I ask my last question?
I have a very silly and not at all serious comment of if you have sex with a ghost, do you catch his HIV afterwards? I'm
It was a
sorry.
serious debate in
It
the
was
living room.
we
I
talked
think-
about it, and the my answer was no, because he's a ghost. You know, it's not no, but like
I think that's worthy of a full sequel. I think we're talking big sequel.
yes.
And something tells me patient zero is still with us, lurking in the ether. Maybe he does want to come back. Though coming back into this world, like, just think of his shock. He thought Reagan was bad enough. It's like, oh my God.
He'd be asked to go back. He'd probably go back to the primordial void.
He'd be like, he'd like arrive in Florida and be locked up like that. Terrifying.
Right, though, you're right.
You're
We're
right.
fine.
You're right. Oh,
I wanted
Dot.
to mention.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Mary had something. No, you go ahead.
Go ahead, Mary.
It's quick. The very end of the movie, the visualization, like in the pool area, where you had him smoking, and you kind of was like he lit it, and then he turned, the sprinklers came on, and then it was also in the
oh my God, that was beautiful.
film. Yes, and I was like, oh my God, this is like a
We were all
beautiful
losing our
visual.
collective shit here,
Like,
like
oh,
watching
that
this
was so
happen. It was so cool.
Yeah, that was my favorite visual of the whole thing.
That was. It was
Oh,
absolutely
beautiful. Yeah. No, we had like, this is actually a good blooper story, but it's a weird blooper where it almost never happened, because there was this iconic candlestick which we'd established in previous scenes, and it was part of our whole production design, so that when Burton comes forward with the candle to light Zero's cigarette, and so we're setting up for the scene, we're blocking, and we're saying, okay, props, and where's the candlestick? And we watched her face just like go, just like fall. And she go, I sent it back on the truck. I sent it back to the prop house early. And it was just, like they have lists and they're planning, and somehow it got sent back. And so we had this like PA have to jump in a car and roar to the prop house before it closed. And we got it back in time. And we shot another scene while we were waiting and stuff. But oh my God, it was one of those like the climax of the film, and we've sent the key prop back. This is what can happen. Yeah.
Oh
So.
yeah.
Mhm.
John.
Not really a question, just a comment. I really appreciate you talking about how this wasn't just a victim movie. That's probably not the correct phrase to put it, but it's not just, as you said, a person dying in the bed. It's, talking about this issue while also doing comedy, being in camp, and doing music, because, we all deal with these sort of topics in our own different way, just like how we all mourn in different ways. And yeah, I just really appreciate bringing that level of craft, and it reminded me of one of my heroes, Jim Henson, when he was very young, he lost his older brother who he was very close to, and instead of just letting the sadness sink in and creating doom and gloom, he used that to sort of invigorate his life and create, brighter materials. And I liked how you still talk about the seriousness of it, but you also inject it with with like the campiness, the comedy, the music, to give it its own flavor, and to show that, we're not Tom Hanks dying in a bed.
And we had our Jim Henson tribute with our butthole puppets.
And
Jim
I'll
rocks.
ask you this. What in your mind, if this could ever happen, even if it's a small little LA, New York, Toronto, London, small little 1 week run, in your mind, what would a zero patience stage musical look like? It's already set for it. It's set for it.
It's no, and hats off to people who can see that and run with it. And that's like when that group, and again early 2000s, I believe, they did it. They staged it. And it was extraordinary. And I was just like, you guys run with it. And I would have loved to go in person. That would have been incredibly special. But I think my brain is like, I realized it a long time ago. I came from a little bit of theater background, high school theater, community theater into my 20s. And that quickly moved into, I loved the recorded image. I particularly liked editing. I don't like live. So I think people are hardwired between the live and the pre-recorded. And control, I like control in terms of editing. Control. So yeah. I think that's where my pendulum ends up swinging. But that said, hats off to anyone who wants green light permission. There's witnesses. Please stage your hearts out if you feel so inspired.
How about we meet you halfway and we shadow cast it with it playing in the background with actors doing it? This could be done a la Rocky Horror. It deserves it. People would eat it up. And
I can't tell you how delighted I would be, so inspired and delighted. And I would jump on a plane wherever it happened.
One day. Leave it in our hands. You already got Typhoid Mary and Sir Richard Burton right there.
I can't wait. So inspired.
I have a literary degree in writing for stage and screen. So if you need anything written, I got you, fam. I got you. Let me use my useless degree.
I just know how to dress up good and lip sync. So I mean, we got that going for us.
I'm sold. You had me at the sideburns.
I'll ask you this last, this is what we usually end on, but before we ask the last question, what is your favorite campy cult musical, John?
it's uh, oh, you know what? Bigger, longer, uncut.
Oh, South Park.
Yeah.
Blame
Oh,
Canada.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. I can't. I
Blame
think we have
Canada
every
and that
song of
bitch
that.
Anne Murray
Every word.
too. I think it is genuinely a great musical on anybody's terms. The writing is spot on. It's smart, it's tight, it's very sharp.
Very
Um,
cheeky.
that like when we go, I hope I hope I'm not mixing up the show and the film. I'm pretty sure we go to hell and meet Satan's
Yes,
boyfriend,
That's the
Saddam.
movie.
Yep.
Like, so there.
Amazing.
That's the one.
Yep.
So this is a curveball question I always throw at people, and you know it's coming. If you had to name the cult that follow this little niche cult, we always give names to like the cult that follow these movies, like the Teen Witch, or the Popular Girls, Grease 2, or the Cool Riders, Dick Tracy, or the Dicks, of course. If you had to name the cult that followed Zero Patience, once we start shadow casting it, etc., what would you name the cult? And I'll end on you, John, but Hades and Mary and Doc, and then we can why John thinks, because he's probably got one better than us.
Hmm.
The first thing that comes to mind for me is just the zeros.
Yeah, that was also
That's
what
the main
comes to mind.
character and stuff like that.
Nice.
So
Yeah.
Trying
it's
to be
easy, it's
clever.
quick, and just you know, it'll
Yeah.
make you think of this musical.
Butthole Surfers isn't really right, but that's really what comes to mind.
Good one.
Um, oh my goodness.
My brain fails me.
Yeah, my brain's also failing me. Like, I don't know. It isn't the organization called ACT UP in the yeah. That I don't know. Like
Zero's patience.
I was just gonna say the
Riders.
I was just gonna say the Scheherazads or the Butthole Duetters.
the duet.
The Scheherazades is very funny. I was
Mhm.
going to pitch the Green Monkeys. So
Oh yeah, because they blame the green monkey for
Yeah.
HIV.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like
I'm
that one.
telling you, John, I really, really want to push this musical to be seen, but I would love, love, love for once in our lifetime for it to be shadow casted because people would love it. I mean, you have, of course, the butthole duet. You've got Papa Boner in the shower, and that would draw people in because of how cheeky it is. But your message is so,
Cheeky,
Sneaky.
oh, no pun intended.
you lie. Pun intended.
Uh, but then people would be hit with that message. I mean, this predated Rent. This predated other musicals that, took the subject seriously. But what's great about Zero Patience is that it's cheeky, pun intended, and it's hilarious and it's erotic and it's just everything, but it's also very serious. And that's why I think it sticks with people because of the message, and it's very timely. So I thank you for creating this art and taking the time to talk with people who love it and who, like my co-hosts who've seen it for the first time and love it as well. I mean, there's something special about it, obviously, that has lived and lived and lived. And I've seen fan art online of this as well. So, I mean,
Awesome. Amazing. Well, huge thanks to all of you for watching it, for having this conversation, for engaging in this way. Here we are 31 years later. So extraordinary and rich to have this conversation. So appreciated.
do you guys have any favorite quotes before we end?
Yes. What was it? Oh my God.
What was it? Oh, let's take a second to do our research here.
The
Oh,
slut
God.
who inspired safer sex.
So caught up on the songs that we forgot the quotes.
The slut who invented safer sex.
One who invented safer sex. Sorry. Yeah, that one. I mean, and also the he was French Canadian. I don't know why that gets me, but
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah. What was the Oh, it was such a good freaking quote, but my brain is mashed potatoes. I'm sorry. There's something about the patriarchy falling. What was it? It was
God, I
something.
don't remember.
Do you remember there was a line about patriarchy? And
Patriarchy will crumble if we only got a wiser. If we
Yes.
only were wiser. Patriarchy would crumble if we only were.
Yes, that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was like, yeah.
That's it. That's what, no, it's like those little bits of queer theory I inserted into. There's a little bit of Leo Bersani. Um, is the rectum a grave? Like there's funny little stuff embedded in those butthole lyrics. So that's why it's the favorite.
Yeah. What is it like the queen or something would blush or something if my rectum I played or something? You that it's
No, we can't not mention the song with the cells were talking.
HIV song.
The HIV song. That was amazing. I
Yeah.
felt like it was something that we were, when they show us those in school with like the personified, biology. I was into it. I was like, yeah.
Oh yeah, she was losing
The
her mind.
bloodstream comes to life and bursts into song.
It was
Yeah.
so fun.
It was great. Sorry.
and 6 or 7 things. Isn't that the name of the song? Six or
That's
seven
right.
things.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a beautiful duet.
And obscure, like deeply buried inside that is an obscure reference to Gilbert and Sullivan, which I was in a lot when I was a kid. And there's I can't remember now which song it is, but there's a Gilbert and Sullivan song which it's directly quoting. So weird bit of trivia. So
Probably Sir
for
Richard
pub quiz.
Burton's. Probably Sir Richard Francis Burton's song that he's singing when he's talking about trying to get financing for the museum.
Culture
Probably
of Certainty. Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
probably. But 6 or 7 things is really haunting as well, and I think
Yeah.
that's a great way to end that movie or almost end it, to have them duet together. But John, I'm telling you, this is not the end. One day you're going to hear from us and you're going to see them this lot dressed up. I just can't wait to see I just can't wait to see their faces in a puppet asshole.
Wonderful.
Well, my trick is with crazy makeup stuff is I'm gonna black out my teeth, so it'll be a little less unsettling with the butthole puppetry. Yeah, it'll be.
Oh.
Thank you so much. You've been so kind to us, and we just appreciate it.
Love you guys, and do let me know if you ever do shadow versions. So very excited.
When we end, is there any new exciting is there any screenings you have on the work of Zero Patients, or have you heard anything in the rumblings for
Right
Zero
now
Patients?
we're focused more on a film I did 3 years later called Lilies, and we've just done the 4K restoration. It's playing at the Quad in New York and Toronto at our TIFF Lightbox. Anyway, it's on it's on social. So that's the sort of focus right now. Zero Patients, we did our 4K restoration tour, mini tour, a year and a bit ago. So yeah.
Well, I just want to say, every time we post something about Zero Patients, people are always like, "What is this movie?" And I'm like, "Just wait. It's amazing. It's amazing. Just wait till you see it. It's touching. It'll make you cry. It'll make you laugh. It'll make you horny and make you everything above. All the above."
Mission accomplished.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. It was so nice to talk to you.
It was
Wonderful
a
to
true
meet all
pleasure.
of you. Thanks again. Take care.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye.